Welcome back, travelers, to another episode of Relish The Journey. This is your host, Miles Biggs, coming at you with another awesome interview. Today, I'm joined by Geoffrey Klein. He's got 9 Dots Media, he's a TEDx speaker, and he calls himself a visual storyteller. In this episode, we'll dive into just what that means and how you can replicate his formula for successful visual storytelling. So, let's meet Geoffrey. So Geoffrey, why don't you share with us a little bit about you, some background for those of us who might not know who you are, what you do. Give us the old elevator pitch.
Thank you, Miles. I'm a visual content producer. So I help create content to help people share their story. That can usually be through graphics, video, and animation primarily. And my backstory is kind of diverse. I didn't study marketing or anything in that related field. I was an English and sociology major. I ended up going to law school. I worked in the film industry. I worked in real estate in England, and then finally found my way back to kind of marketing, which kind of combines my right and left brains to kind of work with both the business side and the creative side. And I love it. I love being able to take an idea and kind of, with the help of others, because I'm not a designer, create something awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious, all of those previous escapades, right? Are those all the 9 dots that your company gets your name from, or does that mean something else?
No, it has a different meaning. So when I decided to start my own company, which was about 3.5 years ago, I had been through some naming exercises at the agency I worked and was always kind of fascinated by the origins of different company names. And I started to brainstorm, and I had a list of probably 80 to 100 names. And then I think at one point I was just Googling kind of like, outside the box ideas or something, and stumbled upon something called the 9 Dots puzzle. The 9 Dot puzzle is a puzzle where you have to try and connect 9 dots with 4 straight lines without lifting up your pen. It's a pretty visual thing, which is partly why I like it, because it enables me to show it to people. And so the name comes from that puzzle. The puzzle itself, what happens is most people keep a box when they try and draw it. They don't realize that they can go extend it. And so the puzzle is actually credited with the phrase, think outside the box. And I really like that. So my messaging in terms of my business has always been, I help people think outside the box by connecting the dots, or connecting the dots by thinking outside the box. And being connected to something that's always been really important to me. I think it's kind of the goal of humanity is to feel connected. And so for me, that's about doing that with my clients and really trying to connect the business to their audience, or that message to the audience.
Yeah, I love that. That's a very creative way to name a company, and I'm sure you get that response every time you tell the story, right? So it does its job.
Well, yeah, I wanted when naming, one of the things I wanted to make sure was that you want something that's easy to say, easy to spell. I have the one challenge that some people wonder if it's the number 9, but then I remind them that the literary rule is that any numbers under 10 you write out. So it's my own little way of saying. But yeah, I like the fact that there's a story behind it, and I think that is kind of fun. And that's part of one of the key principles I try and infuse into what I do.
Yeah, and the word story, you said you love being a visual storyteller. I consider myself a storyteller as well. It's why I love podcasting, and I know you have a podcast as well. But when it comes to visual storytelling, let's talk about that. What's the best way to tell a story visually? How do you do that for people?
Well, you still start at some of the same basic principles of telling a good story. So for me, that means, having a beginning, a middle, and an end. I think that's important. That's kind of how Aristotle did that years and years ago. And it's something that I think still is an important to share your story, because it's an important way to give people what they're looking for. Our brains are hardwired to one story. And in terms of visual, the reason that visual is the best way to tell a story is because that's how we're oriented. And there's facts upon facts and data and studies that demonstrate, that we are, as humans, we prefer visual stories. Our brain processes visual content 60,000 times faster than text. A lot of parts of our brains are there for processing visual content. And visual content is the things that people remember more. So it's a shortcut in terms of getting people to know what you're trying to talk about, because unfortunately we're all suffering from short attention spans and infobesity, which is information overload. There's more information out there than ever before. And at the same time, we're less and less able to maintain our attention. And so a story, and in particular a visual story, enables one to get someone's attention and capture their attention very quickly, as we're much a scan culture. And if you're going through websites and looking for something, that visual story will catch and connect much faster than anything else. So for me, it's using the basic principles of what a good story is, and then it's about what visual ways can you do it. So there's lots. I think what people need to figure out is, what is the message they're trying to tell? I'm a brand guy, so I think it's important that whatever you're sharing is on brand, both in terms of the look and the feel, so those colors, but more importantly, in terms of, what's your purpose, the kind of why of why you do what you do is important in terms of telling that story. So every project that we do that's visual, especially things like animated videos, we start with the script. The script is the text or the words. So even though I'm a big proponent of visual content, a lot of it has to start from the backbone of what is the message you're trying to share. So that's when we're doing a script and whether or not. And I think as simple as it may say, every visual story, the best way to do it is kind of what I would say is one frame at a time. And I, coming from a film background, whether or not you're going to have that one piece of, that social media post that's a static image, or it's going to be some sort of video content, what is it that's going to capture someone's attention right away? And I think it's, again, the imagery that resonates with people based on what it is you're trying to communicate. And I think a lot of times when people create, any kind of marketing or advertising, a lot of times they'll go, oh, it looks really good. That's great. But if it doesn't help get people to connect with what it is you're trying to communicate, then it isn't very effective. So I think it's understanding the purpose that you're trying to communicate first before you create anything. And the second part of it is, what value are you bringing to the audience? We all are trying to connect with people. And if we try too hard to communicate how great we are, all our, whatever your product or service is, the best kind of, features and benefits, those things are important, but they're not going to be things that connect and resonate with people. I joke that, there's a radio station, the most popular radio station is WIIFM, which is what's in it for me. That's the radio station people are
Nice.
listening to. It's being that customer or client centric in your message. And so I developed something called the story pad, where the PAD is the beginning, middle, and end. So you have the P, the A, and the D. The P is the problem or the pain of your customer. That's where you should start. So you'll see a lot of these kind of explainer videos. Are you suffering from fill in the blank? So that's the pain. And when you start with someone's pain, then they're going to connect because, oh, wait, that's me. I have this problem. And so immediately you're connecting to them emotionally. The A is the answer or the solution that your product or service provides. So if you're suffering from this, we can help you with that. And then finally, the D is to highlight the difference it makes in their business or in their life. So even if you're doing a visual story, you want to still think about, how does that connect with what's important to your audience, and start there rather than starting with why you're so good or so great or how you help. It's about having the right order of the messages you share.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's a very actionable formula that people could apply to anything they're doing. General conversation, right? Even if it's not visual, just talking to somebody, thinking about the pad or a podcast like this, right? It's a good framework to follow.
Yeah, and I really tried. The beginning, middle, and end has been something that's been around, forever, in terms of telling stories. And I think the context, the framework I tried to create was something to be simple, because I think one of the problems is that people try and overcomplicate their message. And so, I think the story pad was developed intentionally so it's something very actionable that you can use today, tomorrow, whenever you're trying to effectively communicate with someone. It's a framework for how to tell a story.
And so your main focus is on being a visual storyteller. I'm curious then, in your opinion, why are podcasts so popular? if we learn things visually and everything you just rattled off, which I agree with, but so podcasts aren't visual. It's an audio experience where we can't really see a graphic or a video. We're taking in the audio. It's not visual. Why do you think that's as popular as it is?
My perspective on that is very simple. It's about time. So time is the biggest commodity, and podcasts and audio in general enables you to consume content now while you're doing something else. I listen to a lot of podcasts on the train to work. People do it while they're on a walk. And I think it's that ability to connect into a conversation, but still not have to stop. If you're going to watch something visual, you need to focus your attention. You can't drive. You should never drive and look at video. You can drive and listen to a podcast, which I know a lot of people do, or books on audio. I think that's one of the pieces, is that it saves time in this very busy, information overloaded, short attention span world. The second thing, I think it's that you're kind of that fly on the wall of a conversation. And so I think when people listen to a very good podcast, if you have an interviewer, you're kind of there with them going, oh, what are they going to ask next and how are they going to answer? And so I think there's the curiosity. The other thing about podcasts in particular is the diversity of topics. You can probably ask someone, what are you interested in? And there's a podcast for that. And I think that ability to find an audience that's going to resonate with your message, the what's in it for me, I get to choose what's in it for me, because I get to choose which podcast I decide to spend my attention on. And so I think there's an element of options in a way that video hasn't really crafted. I mean, you have YouTube, and it's definitely what people start to do. And it's similar in that regard, where people go and pick which videos they're going to go and consume. But I think the element of a podcast and why it keeps growing is, especially with voice activated devices like Alexa and Google Home, you can now listen to audio while you're doing something else. I put on audio, not just music. I'll put on comedians or podcasts while I'm cleaning the dishes or doing something else. And so it helps me be productive in multiple ways.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know I listen to podcasts in the same places you rattled off there as examples. And I also think that even if, me as a podcast host, even if I'm not giving someone an image or visual while they're listening, the brain automatically creates them as well. It creates a visual to go along with the story we're listening to. And in a way, that could sometimes be better because we make the visual that suits us in our brain, that we connect with, instead of somebody else telling us what to visually consume.
It's one of those debates about the difference between a book and a movie. And I know I've never heard, or I've rarely heard people say, oh, the movie was way better than the book. You don't hear that often. Most people say, oh, the book was much better. And I think that's probably because when you read a book, you are crafting that visual in your mind. And then if the movie doesn't quite deliver on what you had in your mind, it's not quite as satisfying. So yeah, I definitely think there's an element. And I think with podcasts, there's also a natural ability to want to tell stories. So that I think the reason that people are creating those visuals is because people are crafting, the good podcasts are crafting a story for someone to connect with. And then, your brain is doing the work. There's I do a keynote on the science of story, and there's the evidence of being why stories are so powerful and how our brains are hardwired for story. And they did research which basically found that when someone gives you information, parts of your brain activate that enable you to understand that information. But when you tell a story, all the different parts of your brain activate as if you were experiencing the story yourself. So that if I were to tell you a story about me kicking a ball, you, the listener, your motor cortex would activate in your brain. It's called neural coupling, where the audience, the speaker and the audience end up matching their brain activity. And that's why powerful stories need to make sure they're emotional and sensory, because those are parts of the brain that you can activate when someone tells a story.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I really like that book and movie example. I never thought of it that way, but the reason why people say the book is better is because it was their own visual, right? And going back to your what's in it for me radio station, right? It's what do I visualize for me? And that's often what we prefer over somebody else's visualization that they bring to the screen.
That's true. That being said, I'm not a proponent of abandoning visual content, because while I love podcasts, I think they're in the it's not a this or that scenario. The other thing is about who you are as a person. So about 60% of us are visual learners. So one of the reasons I think that video is powerful, because it matches both the audio and the visual together. Because if you're watching a movie, you're not just watching, it's not silent. So you are still getting, narrative in terms of audio. But I think there is something there about podcasting that enables you to kind of envision the description in the similar to a story. And I think, again, we like variety. So I like to read, I like to watch TV, I like to listen. And so I like to think that the human brain is complex and we need to feed it content of all varying sorts.
Absolutely. Yeah, and speaking of variety, you rattled off a lot of variety in your own professional life before you arrived at what you're doing right now. And I'm assuming all those different experiences have to help feed into the way that you approach marketing and visual storytelling. Is that the case?
Well, definitely. I always say that, my perspective is part of the advantage I give people, because I didn't just study one thing and follow along. I've worked for huge international companies. I've worked for startups, and I've started my own. And you learn from all those different experiences, living in a different culture, and seeing what's important and what's valued, and more importantly, seeing what's universal among all those things. So part of my journey has been about taking all those experiences and all those stories that I've lived through and being able to draw on them in different situations so that I can connect with people. And I think that's part of why I collect stories, experiences. So I've got stories that can connect with a large variety of people, because I think that's part of the fun of life, is having those, diverse voices that you can hear and that you can share. I tell a lot of my own stories, and then I love telling stories of others, because they're things that have happened to people that I haven't experienced, but I can still resonate with them because of some of those universal truths and universal experiences that we have as people.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. So I'm trying to think of the right phrase, but really when it comes to visual storytelling, what's the biggest mistake, I guess, you see people making, right? If you've got your formula with the pad that you brought up, do you see a common error that people make that hurts their ability to tell a story visually?
Well, I'd say yes. One of the things is that not having the foundational pieces before you go and create something. So if you don't have, not using a framework like the story pad or someone else's framework of, where it's the beginning, middle, and end of a story, if it doesn't have a satisfying conclusion, if it's just kind of vanilla, that's going to be true whether it's a podcast, a book, a movie, or any kind of visual content. It has to speak to the people. I'm not a designer, but there's still design principles, and you'll notice what I find: a lot of people may not be able to design something, but if you show them 2 or 3 different things, they can tell you which one they think is better. And the whole idea of, visual content is subjective to a certain degree, but I think there are also things everyone would agree, like, that's not really appealing, and certain things are appealing. So there are some design principles I think that you have to adhere to in terms of everything from color and placement and composition, of a design, white space, and all those kinds of things that designers are trained to do, which is the reason I think why, if you hire a professional to design something versus someone who's not a professional, you can often see the differences between, it's not just their technical artistic ability, it's also their design thinking and their way of learning about how to place things in a visual way. So I think there is a skill set beyond the technical part in terms of the design part that's important in terms of telling that visual story, whether, again, it's a 2D or 3D, animated or not. There's reasons that certain filmmakers are successful and others are not. There's someone who has a creative eye, and I think it's one recognizing the ability to get those kind of subject matter experts to help you. There are a lot of tools now out there to do animated videos. I've tried, and what I always say about things, when you try and do something that's not that you haven't mastered, it ends up taking you twice as long and it is half as good. So I think it's part of the key is stick to what you know. So when I work with clients, and marketing is an area where people have a sense, oh, I can do this, and I think they can do it, but can they do it well? Everyone does social media, but can they do social media effectively? So I think the same is true of creating visual content. It's not that hard to create visual content. I think it's hard to create effective, compelling content that's going to resonate with your audience.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It really does. And I think a lot of people are guilty of what you said, right? Oh, I can do that. It'll be easy. And it's doing it and doing it well are always two different things.
Exactly.
And one thing I saw that you do well, I saw online, is not just, visual storytelling and with the graphics, but also telling a story. And you're the visual, standing up on stage. A question I get all the time, because I have a TED Talk coming up at the end of this year once we're able to gather again after quarantine. And I know you have a TED Talk as well. People ask me a lot how I was able to get a TED Talk. And so I'll ask you that question. What was your process for getting up in that red circle?
I think one is intention and desire. So, the whole adage that, if you ask people what the biggest phobia is, death is number 2 and public speaking is number 1. So it's not for everyone. And I think there's an element of recognizing, but there are a lot of people now who want to be on that stage. I was fortunate, I think also, I had done work well before I started looking to try and do a TED Talk. So the years where I try and craft my presentations and craft those stories, I've worked with different coaches. There's a guy out in San Diego named Adam Arkell, who now that's what he does, or a part of what he does is helping people who want to get on TED stage. And it's about, part of it's about the skill, and then part of it's about the desire. And one of the things I applied to 2 different TED conferences. One of them, they had already received them. The other one, basically, they had, I don't know how many submissions, they had narrowed it down from, I think, 100 down to 50, down to eventually 12, of which they picked, I think, 6. And I was really fortunate because I had an idea, and I think TED, the TED conference are always looking to try and, well, what's the idea behind what you're trying to say? And for me, I had a very kind of loose idea. We're talking about the power of story. And so what mattered for me was the person that I spoke to, who was running the conference, basically said, you have a starting point, but are you willing to kind of work, beyond that? And I, had presented, kind of what I consider my signature talk. And I was like, well, isn't that? And she pushed me. And so willingness to get better, I think, is really important as a speaker. However good a speaker you think you may be now, you would hope that if you work at it within the next 6 months, the next 12 months, you'll get better. And I actually had a stroke of luck with my TED. So we were supposed to originally do it in the November, and then we had snowstorms that canceled it. And so it got pushed a couple months. And that enabled me to practice and to hone and to tweak both the content and the delivery. And I was really happy that when we finally got to the recording of it, it was one of my better performances. And so I think it's not just getting the whatever presentation, the talk. It's also about, putting your best foot forward into it to make it successful. But it was a great experience.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I have that moment right now. Like I said, mine was canceled. It was supposed to be in April, and now I have no idea when it's going to be whenever COVID-19's over. So I've taken the same approach to it, right? Now I have a chance to just get even better, work on the delivery, even though I have the content memorized. That's only part of it. You've got to be able to show up and really sell it, the passion behind it, and help people create those visuals like we've been talking about that they connect to make sure it's an impactful talk and you're not just up there gripping a microphone in fear and saying the words.
Yeah, it's and I think one of the things you just said is about passion. You have to really believe in it. And I think the difference between effective speakers, authenticity behind the message. When I talk about visual content, I talk about story. I believe it strongly. I'm passionate about it and sharing that message. And I think to be a very good presenter and speaker, you need to really have that. I don't think it's something that can be easily faked. And so I think authenticity is a critical part, not just in speaking, but in storytelling in general. That's one of the fundamental things you need to make sure that you're credible, because now more than ever, kind of people's BS radar is heightened. I think we're also just craving that authenticity. we want it to be real.
Absolutely. Yeah. And with passion, we've talked about this a little bit, but you had a non-linear path to find the passion that you have right now, right? So if you had to summarize your journey to where you're at in your career now with visual storytelling, how would you summarize that in just 3 words?
3 words is challenging. So I would say it was an open, grateful adventure. So you have to be open to the twists and turns, always be grateful for the experiences, and always embracing and seeking out the next adventure.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, especially gratefulness, because I find that when you are open and you can really focus on what you are grateful for instead of maybe what you wish you had, then those adventures that come afterwards tend to be more of what you want and less of what you don't want. It's just how the universe works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about, I'll share with you one last part of my philosophy, which is the difference between dumb luck and smart luck. Dumb luck is when you walk down the street and there's $5 and you pick it up and you get it. That's being dumb luck. Smart luck is you want to be a speaker, take a class on speaking. You want to be an actor, take an acting class. Put yourself in a position where you're learning and then you're getting better. And then all of a sudden opportunities arise.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to be smart about the dumb luck, I guess, right? You put yourself in the position to then stumble upon something after you have the right skill set to make advantage of it. So if people like what you had to say, they want more about Geoffrey Klein and 9 Dots Media and visual storytelling, where should we send them after they listen to this episode?
So there's 2 sites, one for my speaking, which is ggklein.com, which is if there's interest in any workshops or presentations. And then the other one would be 9dotsmedia.com, which is my content agency. And then I'm on social media as those 2 things generally, either GG Klein on Instagram and Twitter and 9 Dots or 9 Dots Media on those platforms as well.
Great. Well, I appreciate your time on the podcast today, and I look forward to getting your story out there to the world.
Thanks very much.
All right, that's a wrap for another episode of Relish the Journey. Thank you all so much for listening. Be sure to check out Geoffrey Klein at the links in the show notes. And if you like this episode, go ahead and share it with somebody you know and love that could benefit from our mantra of Relish the Journey. Until next time, everyone, cheers.